for your time. I appreciate it.
Good to be with you, Liz.
So let's start with the budget. Did you certify that is, in fact, in balance?
Well, keep in mind, as controller, I have no power to certify. It's probably the most common question I get. There's a misunderstanding that there is a certification role. What there is under the statute, tied to the change in law in the late 90s, that says that if the budget's late, the legislators don't get paid. There's a requirement for, as part of the pay to be released, for the controller to make a determination that the appropriation bills have been acted upon to provide for state and local government.
Right.
So I have not made that determination. There is a significant part of the overall budget package of bills, the revenue bill, that hasn't been acted upon. So until there's complete action on all the budget bills, we're not going to go through that determination.
So my understanding is it's possible they might return next week. Have you had any indication from them about that or not?
I hear what you hear, and that is that discussions are apparently happening at least at a staff level, and the expectation is they'll come back sooner than later. From my point of view, they should have never left until the action was completed. There's always a danger that when you go home, that it takes a lot to bring you back. So I think this process is already way overdue, way too late. Now's the time for action.
But do you not have the power then, based on what you say, and not calling it certification, but whatever your power, the power to say this budget is in fact in balance, does have sufficient funds to cover the payment of the pay for the legislators? Do you not have the power then to say, this budget concerns me and I think that in 2 weeks it's going to fall out of balance because there's a distinct possibility of that, and not sign off on it?
Well, bear in mind, that's what we did last year. We said it was a by-time budget. We didn't think it would hold together. We were right. The part of the law that...
But you didn't stop it, right?
No, well, I was about to say, the part of the law that deals with legislative pay says that if you don't do the determination, the legislative pay is held up. You don't stop the budget. You don't undo the budget. You don't require the budget to be done over again. All that part of the law refers to is legislative pay. So there is no process in New York, in most states, they don't have this either, because the responsibility is for the elected legislators and governor to put a budget in place, not for the controller to put a budget in place or to undo one. So that if the controller makes a determination that the appropriation bills weren't acted upon, again, there's no reference to budget balance in the statute. All that you would do, you wouldn't stop the budget, you wouldn't change the budget. Legislative pay would just be held up for a longer period of time.
But what if you held legislative pay hostage and then said, I am so concerned about this budget that I'm willing to hold this pay hostage? Essentially, that's what Bill Stokowski's doing right now in Buffalo, is he not? He's holding legislative pay hostage. He's refusing to sign off on the revenue.
Well, he has a vote. He has a vote. I mean, the way, for better or for worse, the way our Constitution and process is set up, those that have a vote on the budget are the legislators, and then the governor as the executive. The controller is not vested with the power to have a vote or to be the one to overturn the legislative and the gubernatorial process. What would happen is legislative pay would be held up. It wouldn't change anything about the budget at all.
But it's never been challenged in court, this whole question of how much power, except with the exception of the coup, which then ended itself. There was a question of when people had to get paid, whether they could go to court to force you to pay them, if they were or were not doing their jobs, that kind of thing.
Well, the reason that hasn't been in court is it's really never been a question. If you read the statute, it's pretty clear. There have been 3 controllers that have gone through this process, a number of budgets that have gone through this process. We do make commentary on the enacted budget, and we point out deficiencies, we point out risks, we point out concerns. It is the responsibility of the legislature and the governor to respond to those concerns. Again, there seems to be a misunderstanding out there that if the determination is that the appropriation bills weren't acted upon, that something is triggered other than legislative pay being held up. And the statute is very clear. In fact, it says at the beginning of the statute, this is for the purposes of the legislative pay. It is not for budget balance. It is not for undoing a budget or changing a budget.
This very question has been bandied about since 2002. And actually, Andrew Cuomo was using it to pressure Carl McCall, who at the time was the state comptroller, and they were having a primary battle. So there is a lot. I mean, this is something sort of a time-honored tradition for a person who runs against a controller to try and make this argument. There is legal action, though, that your office can take. For example, Ned Regan, the former comptroller, 2 controllers back now, a Republican, did sue the Democratic governor in 1991 to try and block, I think it was a borrowing of the MTA cash to use it to plug the budget. And it ended up not going to court. Have you ever considered using, because I think actually Mario Cuomo dropped the whole thing, but have you ever considered using that kind of power to say something that you do not appreciate or approve of, that you've noted in quite harsh terms actually, many of them you don't agree with what the legislature is doing. Have you considered legal action to say, okay, I'm going to block you, use my fiduciary power to block you from doing these crazy raids and borrowing schemes that you guys have come up with?
Well, I think you'd have to look at that carefully, and you'd have to look at a specific borrowing where as controller you may have some role in it. You can't just make up law, as you go along, and I don't think the public would be too appreciative of frivolous lawsuits that seem to be more about making statements and really keeping the government process moving along. Look, the responsibility is very clear. It's up to the legislature and the governor to do their jobs and to have a balanced budget and have a timely budget. And we're going to use the bully pulpit of the Comptroller's Office to be critical, as we have been in the past. But those are the people who are charged with the responsibility to make those decisions, to make the right decisions. And if they don't, they'll be held accountable by the public.
Speaking of borrowing, in that revenue bill is this difficult sort of program or proposal called that your opponent, Harry Wilson, has deemed borrowing from the pension fund. You've called it smoothing or amortization, to try and give more predictability to the state and to local governments that have to contribute, and they see that spike up and down with the market, right, into the pension fund. How is it not borrowing? And also, the original proposal, which came out of your office, has changed in a couple of iterations. Do you agree with the most recent one that is in the revenue bill?
We had a proposal a year ago, and my position has been that is the proposal that made the most sense. It was right for the pension fund, which is the first obligation to protect that fund, and would be helpful, especially to local governments who, as you point out, have a difficulty when you have volatility in the contribution rates. That is the proposal that is included in the revenue bill, and I think it is a positive approach. It is infinitely better than some of the other proposals that have been floating around. There is no money being taken out of the pension fund. Money is not being taken from the pension fund and given to state government or given to any other government. What we would allow as an option, it's not even required that it be undertaken, is that if you wanted to opt into this alternate methodology for handling the contribution rates, you would, in years where you have a spike in the contribution rates, be allowed to take a part of it, not all of it, but a part of it, and pay it over time. It's like your utility bill if you choose to do balance billing, where in the winter months you can pay a little less because the bills would be very, very high, the heating bills because of the winter. Other times of the year where maybe you'd be paying a lower amount, you won't go down as much because you're doing a balance billing over time. It'd be the same kind of option. What we would require in this is for when the rates would go down, the establishment of reserve funds. So you start to build up the money for the next time where you have a rate fluctuation on the upside. You have the money to draw from to pay for the contribution.
But is that not sort of, in essence, floating a loan to these folks? In other words, you're asking them to pay back the money eventually with an interest rate, but the interest rate is lower than the expected rate of return from the pension fund overall, is it not?
There would be a market rate interest rate that would be paid. Obviously, we have different kinds of investments, so it would be consistent with other fixed rate investments that we have.
But you don't consider this borrowing, because Richard Gravich, for example, the lieutenant governor, who's also a Democrat and has been assailed for his borrowing proposals, also considers this borrowing.
Well, his borrowing was to take money, borrow it, and pay it. This is not. This is saying you can have a schedule of payments similar to a balance billing with your utility, as many New York families are familiar with. It's a different way to manage the payments. The liabilities would be booked in the same way. It doesn't affect the funded ratio of the fund. Keep in mind, New York has entered this very difficult time with the best funded pension plan of any state in the nation. All these articles consistently about significant underfunding of pension plans, some as much as almost 50% underfunded. New York is not in that situation because we have a very responsible way to manage our pension fund obligations. This proposal doesn't change that. It is a responsible change in methodology that recognizes that with the volatility in rates, that we need to give this as an option, particularly local governments who are concerned about property taxes. Everybody's talking property taxes. This is a tangible solution for some communities to manage this obligation in a way that looks out for property taxpayer interests at the same time that the pension fund is protected.
So you do support what's in the revenue bill, just to reiterate. Okay. You talked earlier about an activist role for the Comptroller's office. Speaking of which,